You know us, we tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We are legion, we do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us. We are anonymous.
Mad monk, mystic, prophet, man of God, or con man? Rasputin's evil eyes stare at us from across the generations as a warning shot to all those who would believe without question the words of a self-proclaimed spiritual man. Grigori Rasputin was born in 1869 and was a Russian mystic and self-promoting holy man who somehow managed to befriend the family of the Tsar Nicholas II, the last monarch of Russia, and gained considerable influence in the late Imperial Russia. He has been the subject of numerous films, documentaries, books, and even pop songs. His infamy mainly derives from his unholy activity and not his piety. A drunk, a sexual deviant, a con man, and seemingly impossible to murder. Is it possible that an ordinary man from the Russian countryside could somehow end his life assassinated because of the power he held over the entire empire? He had a magical influence over the mind and the soul of the Romanovs, a power so great that it would eventually lead to the downfall of the dynasty itself. He was a power-hungry, narcissistic egomaniac with sexually deviant tendencies that managed to hoodwink one of the most powerful royal families on planet Earth. He had groups of female followers he called his little ladies, who would all give themselves to him sexually. And yet he was filthy, rarely washed, and smelled like an old goat. This is the story of the man, his magical ability to control others, and his deviant nature. Rasputin was born to an ordinary peasant family in a small Siberian village. And yet he proceeded to have a mystical religious conversion after taking a pilgrimage in 1897.
So Rasputin grew up in a time that was, in Siberia, an incredibly lonely, vast, empty space where many, you could imagine, suffered from extreme boredom. And in the culture that developed in that environment, a interest in the spiritual, how do you want to say this? A fascination at the time, both as a society and as what you could consider to be modern-day pop culture, a fascination with the occult, the unknown, the spiritual, the Ouija board of the day, if you will.
He was soon being described as a monk or a strannik, a wandering pilgrim. He held no official office in the Russian Orthodox Church, and yet traveled to St. Petersburg and somehow managed to captivate the church and the social leaders.
Rasputin began early in life claiming to have powers of healing, particularly on horses, which would later be transferred to humans, and also with the ability to see into the future. He would have visions, and people well, didn't always like him.
He was very quickly a figure of elite society and eventually met the Tsar in 1905.
Rasputin's approach to spirituality and life in general that led to control him also gave him an internal conflict when he would challenge his sin to thereby be closer to God. He found himself the fascination, either by design or by subtle manipulation, to be the fascination of other people even claiming him to be a deity themselves. What is interesting about this is that he developed something of a cult following, but it was more than that, a sex cult following, with his political influence of the day, as well as his parties he would throw, not parties, ceremonies that he considered part of spirituality, where he would often find himself meeting with a politician early in the day, visiting a prostitute, taking a prostitute to see the next politician with him. His life became extremely interesting, to say the least.
It was soon after this that Rasputin started acting as the healer for the Tsar's only son, Alexei, who suffered from a terrible hemophilia or blood disease. Rasputin became very special to the Tsar's wife, Alexandra. She was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom, and like her grandmother, she was a carrier of the hemophiliac disease. She was famous for encouraging her husband's resistance to those who would strip him of his autocratic authority as king. Alexandra was more than disliked by her subjects. She was cold and mean to them, and yet to her close friends she was said to be shy and nervous in front of the Russian people. It is believed that she knew of their hatred towards her. There is little wonder that such animosity was held. She is known to have disliked Russian culture, food, and even manner of dancing. Her Russian accent was heavy, and her inability to produce a male heir incensed the people. After the birth of the Grand Duchess Olga, her firstborn child, Nicholas was reported to have said, "We are grateful she was a daughter. If she was a boy, she would have belonged to the people. Being a girl, she belongs to us." Alexandra burst into tears when her second child was also a girl because she feared what people would think of her. And the next two female children didn't help her cause. But then Alexei was born, and soon she was distancing herself even further from the Russian people to spend more and more time alone with him. She spent time with her close friends only, and not the aristocratic ladies whom she called frivolous. In return, the ladies of the court called her the Tsarina, haughty. She was a desperate soul, feeling alone and hated in a foreign world with only a small group of close friends and her son. She was therefore a prime target for con men. She nevertheless held great influence over her loving husband, the Tsar. By 1914, Alexandra was addicted to barbiturates, stating that she was literally saturated with them. Her interest in the world of the mystics did not start with Rasputin. A mystic by the name of Philippe Nikiye-Vachot held a brief sway over the royal couple until he was exposed as a charlatan in 1903 and expelled from Russia. In fact, the royal couple also forced the church to circumnavigate the rules of canonization in order to create a saint, which they believed would help them produce a son and heir. This angered church and laity alike. Nevertheless, Alexandra lived as a recluse for the majority of her husband's reign and even had a bad relationship with her mother-in-law, the Dowager Empress. The position of Dowager Empress was senior to the rank of Tsarina, and Alexandra was forced to understand such. The Dowager Empress would be seen to hold the arm of the Tsar, while the Tsarina had to walk behind. Alexandra resented the attention her husband received in this respect, and Maria, the Dowager Empress, resented the Tsarina. Nevertheless, Alexandra held great influence over the Tsar and was always giving him advice. She believed strongly in the divine right to rule. This is the idea that God had somehow given the people of a family of special blood and attributes. She in no way believed that the royal family needed the authority of the people to rule because God had given it to them. Her aunt, Empress Frederick of Germany, wrote to Queen Victoria that Alex is very imperious and will always insist on having her own way. She will never yield one iota of power she will imagine she wields. The people of Russia soon turned to the Tsarina during the First World War, when her German birth became a sticking point. But more than just her birth, the people also hated her ways, her poor ideals, and mostly her devotion to the mystic Rasputin. In fact, even the aristocrats spoke of assassinating her to save the empire. Indeed, Rasputin was seen as a mystic and visionary by some, but by others he was nothing more than a religious charlatan with too much power and influence. The difference between the perceptions of Rasputin are quite simple. There are people who are susceptible to hypnosis and religious belief, and there are those who simply cannot be hypnotized and see reality for what it is without external spiritual explanations. The former were more happy to believe in a spiritually powerful individual, whereas the later's logical approach to life didn't allow for such beliefs. Suspicion is a powerful evolutionary tool, and it can spread, but so too can belief. His highest point of influence came when, in 1915, Tsar Nicholas II left St. Petersburg to oversee the Russian army fighting World War I, while leaving behind Alexandra and Rasputin to undermine the empire. But how did all of this come to be? How can it be that a peasant boy can become such an influence upon one of the most powerful dynasties in the world? Rasputin was born in a small, insignificant Siberian village along the Tula River. His official birth date is 21st January 1869, and he was christened the following day. He was named after the local saint Grigori. His father Yefim was a normal farmer, government courier, and church elder. His mother was Anna, and she suffered from an all-too-often problem of having had several other children die in their infancy. Almost nothing is known about Rasputin's childhood. This didn't stop later generations creating stories, none of which are reliable. We do know that he was not formally educated and was actually illiterate until his early adulthood. We also know that he was an unruly child, getting cited for drunkenness, theft, and disrespect of the elders. The rumors created later of him having stolen horses, blaspheming, and some other major crimes are all false and cannot be substantiated. In 1886, he decided to go traveling and arrived in Oblast. Here he courted and married a young woman called Pokrovskoye. She would remain devoted to him for the rest of her life. They had 7 children together, but only 3 survived: Dmitri, Maria, and Varvara. By 1897, Rasputin was becoming more and more interested in religion and decided to go on a pilgrimage. Nobody is entirely sure why. Some say he was in fact escaping punishment for horse theft. Others that he received a vision from the Virgin Mary or of Saint Simeon. It may actually be that he met a theological student called Melity, who inspired him to seek out a living in the church. It was a radical life change for a 28-year-old who had been married for 10 years and had another child on the way. Some say that his change of life must have been inspired by some great spiritual desire, but it could easily be that he felt trapped by family and responsibility. Taking into account his later love of mixing in great circles and his sexual deviancy, it is highly likely he spotted an opportunity for wealth, fame, and fun. He would not have been the first man of the cloth to have done so, and he most certainly would not be the last. In 1897, his visit to the monastery of St. Nicholas was said to have been transformative. He learned to read and write, but he was soon complaining of the monastic life. He claimed that living in a monastery was too coercive and that the monks were practicing homosexuality. He returned home a changed man. He looked like a tramp with long disheveled hair and a mad glint in his eye. He went long periods of time without touching himself or washing. Throughout the rest of his life, people would complain about his hygiene. He once bragged about not changing his underwear for over 6 months. The food would often rot in his beard. Some said he smelled like a goat. he had become a vegetarian, prayed and sang, and didn't even drink alcohol. It was, of course, the beginning of his act. He became a strannik, or holy pilgrim, and wandered for months at a time visiting holy cities. In this way, he was building relationships with new and influential people and building a name for himself as the Holy Wanderer. A great many wandering holy men had been written about and become famous. He would become one, and wandering and gaining of knowledge was his backstory. It is even said he went as far as Greece, and the reason for this is simple. It was seen as the very center of Orthodox Christianity. As if by mystical magic, he soon built a circle of acolytes who prayed with him. Back home, he built a chapel in his father's cellar and held secretive prayer groups. Locals suspected all manner of things about this secretive prayer group. They believed that the local girls were ceremoniously washing him naked before each meeting. New songs that they had never heard before were being sung. It was even rumored that he had in fact joined the Klisti, a religious sect whose ecstatic rituals were rumored to include self-flagellation and sexual orgies.
Spiritual frenzies. Members going into dark places, caves, underground basements, and spinning themselves into a state of frenzy, a spiritual heightened awareness, which was then followed by orgies. Sexualized states, the very act of sinning, bringing one closer to God through repentance afterwards.
Klist call themselves the Christ believers. They are thought to have been founded by Daniel Filipovich of Kostroma. They shrugged off the priesthood, holy books, and any veneration of traditional saints. They claimed that man could communicate directly with the Holy Spirit. Their members could attend normal Orthodox Church services, probably to maintain a sense of normality. They believed mainly in asceticism, gaining divine grace through ecstatic rituals, which many said were nothing but sexual orgies and flagellation. Indeed, their name sounded very similar to the word for whip. There were, in fact, around 40,000 members in Russia at the time, with each cell or ark being led by a male or female leader called Christ and the Mother of God. They had a secret messaging system and were very often persecuted because of their secrecy and the imagination fostered by such activities. As tempting as it is, knowing of Rasputin's reputation, to state that he must have been a member, there is in fact no evidence other than hearsay to prove that he was. Soon, however, the word of this mystical holy man spread. Siberia was abuzz with rumors. Sometime between 1902 and 1904, he traveled to Kazan on the Volga River. Very quickly, he was the talk of the town. He was a starets, or holy man, a mystic and wise man. people could go to Rasputin and solve their spiritual problems. Again, the rumors were rife that he was in fact having deviant sex with his female followers, but he somehow managed to convince the Father Superior of Seven Lakes Monastery, local church officials, and even the bishop that he was in fact chosen by God. He was even given a letter of introduction to Bishop Sergei of St. Petersburg Theological Seminary. His future was looking very bright, and now he traveled to the capital. Bishop Sergei was taken in by the Khan and introduced Rasputin to the church leaders, including the inspector of the theological seminary, Feofan, who was incredibly well connected in social circles. Rasputin locked onto him and used him to gain even further influence. Feofan asked Rasputin to stay at his home, and he became Rasputin's very own publicity manager. Soon Rasputin was being pushed in front of the rich, famous, and influential in St. Petersburg. Rasputin stayed for a few months before returning home for a short time. But by 1905, he had formed friendships with many members of the aristocracy, including the Black Princess who had married the Tsar's cousin. Soon Rasputin would be introduced to the most powerful man in Russia, Tsar Nicholas II of the Romanov dynasty. The House of Romanov was the reigning royal house of Russia from 1613 to 1917. They achieved prominence as boyars of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, and later the Tsardom of Russia under the reigning Rurik dynasty, which became extinct upon the death of Tsar Fyodor I in 1598. Several pretenders and impostors fought for the crown during the Polish-Muscovite War. On 21 February 1613, Michael Romanov was selected Tsar of Russia by the Zemsky Sobor, establishing the Romanovs as Russia's second reigning dynasty. Michael's grandson, Peter I, established the Russian Empire in 1721, transforming the country into a great power through a series of wars and reforms. The direct male line of the Romanovs ended when Elizabeth of Russia died in 1762, leading the House of Holstein-Gottorp to ascend to the crown under Peter III. The abdication of Tsar Nicholas II on 15 March 1917 was a result of the February Revolution, ended 304 years of Romanov rule, establishing the Russian Republic under the Russian provincial government in the lead-up to the Russian Civil War. In 1918, the Tsar and his family were executed by the Bolsheviks, and the 47 survivors of the House of Romanov's 65 members went into exile abroad. Rasputin first met this last of the Tsars on 1st November 1905 at the Peterov Palace. The Tsar recorded the event in his diary, writing that he and Alexandra had made the acquaintance of a man of God, Grigori from Tobolsk province. It would be several months before Rasputin would meet the Tsar and Tsarina again. In 1906, Rasputin sent the Tsar a telegram asking the Tsar if he might present the Tsarina with an icon of Saint Simeon. On the 18th of July they met, and again in October when Rasputin met the children. It was during this crucial time that Rasputin had somehow managed to convince the royal family that he had the power of the Lord within him to heal Alexei. It was possible that the initial introduction had been that Rasputin was a holy man and healer, but whatever the case, he was asked to pray for Alexei. And Alexei is key to the power that Rasputin held over the royal family. Science had let them down, and they sought out alternative remedies. It was the belief held by Alexandra that Rasputin could ease the pain and bleeding of her hemophiliac son. Indeed, they had truly believed that Rasputin already had on several occasions. Alexandra's attachment to Rasputin was said to have been passionate, and he was very quickly an indispensable member of the royal entourage, from peasant farmer to royal courtier. It is possible that Rasputin had learned the art of hypnosis, or some form of mesmerism which had been popular for decades. There is little doubt that he had the ability to convince people of his power. It is therefore more likely that he was what we these days call a mentalist, a person who had the ability to manipulate people with the appearance of some kind of psychic magic. In truth, it is nothing more than understanding human nature and being able to read clues. Using these readings, the mentalist makes subtle suggestions and steers the outcome of a conversation or meeting. Whatever method Rasputin used, it was not the power of God, and it was not mystical magic. It was psychology. He knew precisely what he was doing, and he will go down in history as one of the greatest con men of all time. The city at this time, however, was awash with rumors of the power of this holy man. The aristocracy, especially the females, were in awe of him. In the spring of 1907, Rasputin was called upon to pray for Alexei, who was having a serious internal hemorrhage. Rasputin duly prayed, and the next morning Alexei recovered. In the summer of 1912, Alexei had a bad hemorrhage in his thigh and groin following a carriage ride that was particularly bumpy at the royal hunting grounds. Alexei was delirious with fever and in severe pain, and it was thought close to death. The Tsarina had a telegram sent to Rasputin asking him to pray. Rasputin promptly responded, saying, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much." The next morning, Alexei was unchanged, but the Tsarina held on to her faith, and the following day, Alexei stopped bleeding. Nobody knows how the boy recovered, but it may be Rasputin's instructions of having faith and keeping the doctors away may have helped the boy to relax. Nevertheless, Rasputin had yet again performed a miracle. He was an essential part of the royal family. The faith that the royal family had in Rasputin brought him power and prestige at court. Such power and prestige also brings jealousy, and rumors follow. However, the Tsar, undeterred, appointed Rasputin his lamplighter. This position meant that Rasputin was charged with keeping the lamps burning in the palace and allowed him 24-hour access to the royal family in their private residences. As early as December 1906, Rasputin had become so close to the Tsar that he could ask for a personal favor. He wanted to change his name to Rasputin Novyi, or Rasputin New. His request was granted speedily. Such favors and such speed proved beyond doubt that Rasputin was treated with great care and attention. But the rumors about Rasputin at this time were all true. He was accepting bribes and he was accepting sexual favors from his aristocratic and lay followers. He was soon accused of religious heresy and even rape. The people said he held too much sway over those in power and that he was even having an affair with the Tsarina herself. There is no evidence of this.
Often described as smelling like a goat, somehow he still had a fascination. Women, in particular, found him to be charming in a way that very few people with food still in their beards can be.
At this time, in many parts of the world, those in power were dabbling in spiritualism and theosophy. But here in Russia, Rasputin was being seen as a step too far.
What's interesting about the fact that Rasputin did develop a cult following. People would come to him, come to his ceremonies, where they would often, parties would be thrown with lavish food displays, piled up and seated at the center of the table. You'll often see, center of attention is Rasputin, almost as if part of the display itself.
The Holy Synod accused him time and again of immoral and evil acts.
There's no other way to describe it other than to say he held their interest for whatever reason. He's been described in different ways as a sex demon or as a king rat, beautiful in an ugly kind of way that you can't help but look away from and enjoy looking at the same time.
Because Rasputin was a court official and lived close to the royal family, his apartment was under constant surveillance. The evidence from this Secret Service work proves that Rasputin was indeed indulging in deviant practices and having affairs with many of the ladies of leisure. These reports were given to the Tsar, who seems to have promptly ignored them. Accusations of membership of the Klisti sect surfaced again, as they often did. Even though Rasputin's own daughter, Maria, claimed her father was not a member, it does seem likely that he was highly influenced by their methods. One Klist practice was known as rejoicing, and it was a ritual which sought to overcome human sexual urges by engaging in group sexual activities so that, in consciously sinning together, the sin's power over the human was nullified. Rasputin, like many New Age spiritualists of the period, stated that salvation did not rely on the church, but on the Spirit of God within oneself. He said that repentance needed sin for there to be true salvation. You have to sin to repent and receive salvation. You must yield to the temptation of sex and drunkenness to dispel humility and vanity and proceed to repent. It is this philosophy of life that caused the rumors, which were highly likely much more than mere rumors. Rasputin did indeed hold secret orgies with the influential under the guise of spiritual fulfillment. During the years of the First World War, his drinking and sexual deviances increased. He took more and more bribes in the form of money and sexual favors. He had critics dismissed from their jobs, and he started to appear more and more cynical. His sexual practices grew more and more. His methods of attaining grace through the act of sin was the ultimate secret of Rasputin and his ultimate demise. Rasputin spent his last day alive indulging in an astonishing amount of debauchery. It was the 16th of December, 1916, and Rasputin was drunkenly staggering back into his apartment as he had done so many times before. The Secret Service records prove this with the words "dead drunk," "very drunk," or "overcome with drunk" being used. Following a brief sleep, Rasputin was back out on the prowl. He would make his way to the bathhouse, where the little ladies, as he called them, would bathe his genitals and thrash him with twigs. He would then walk into the local church, renounce Satan, and ask forgiveness. After all, as he said, there is no repentance without sin. Back home again, and on his 12th bottle of wine, a plump blonde lady called Sister Maria came visiting. His niece, Anna, was there, and she recalled that Maria helped him remove the tension that apparently took hold of him against his will. They both then proceeded to his study, where they indulged in sex. It was quick, because Rasputin was already promised to Princess Irina, the wife of Felix Yusupov, later that evening, and that would prove to be his downfall, as we will see later on. "I don't degrade you, I purify you," Rasputin told his female followers, as he purified them with sex, and even his wife said that Rasputin had enough for all. Rasputin called his women little ladies, and he would often take them back to his study, where the sofa had been so overused the back broke. The whole of Russia was talking about him. One monastery even claimed that Rasputin would hold orgies with the nuns. And because of the outrage, there was no shortage of people who wanted him dead. Clerics, priests, husbands, fathers, and more. One of them even collected over 100 bombs with which to dispatch him. Even a mad dwarf attempted to pull off Rasputin's penis, but he survived again and again as the anger against him grew. And yet his sins did not end. During the war, he even charged families 2,000 rubles to keep their men from being posted to the front line. Such was his influence. He even claimed in public that he had bedded the Tsarina, and when somebody asked him for proof that he was Rasputin, he dropped his trousers to wave his manhood before them. He then proceeded to hand out notes stating, "Love unselfishly." The Tsarina refused to believe that this had been the act of Rasputin himself. Still, the Tsarina refused to hear a word against him, preferring to believe that an impostor was posing as Rasputin and misbehaving in public to blacken his name. But it was this third period which truly was the beginning of his downfall. It was World War I, and the accusations of his unpatriotic influence on the court were growing. The Tsarina herself was of British and German descent, and so was accused of spying. Rasputin thought he could use the war to improve his lot and stated he wanted to go to the front to bless the troops. Grand Duke Nicholas was the commander-in-chief, and he said that if Rasputin came anywhere near the front, he would have him hung. But Rasputin said he had received a divine revelation that the Russian armies would fail unless the Tsar took over. This was a direct and obvious lie to remove the Grand Duke from power, as if Rasputin was showing him who was really in charge. And because of this, the Tsar actually did take personal command of the Russian army, and history shows how well that went. It was bad, very bad for the Russians. But Rasputin had shown who was powerful, and while the Tsar was away at war, his influence over the Tsarina increased. He was now her personal confidant and advisor. He chose government officials and handpicked them for his own purposes. The elite of Russia and the ordinary people alike were horrified, and yet wives of politically hungry men actually gave themselves up to Rasputin to buy his favor. But not all remained silent. Not all played the game. One powerful member of the Duma made a speech on November 19, 1916, stating that the Tsar's ministers, who had been turned into marionettes whose threads had been taken firmly in hand by Rasputin and the Empress Alexandra, the evil genius of Russia and the Tsarina, who has remained a German on the Russian throne and alien to the country and its people. This speech was crucial to the downfall of Rasputin. It was immediately after this speech that Felix Yusupov made contacts to participate in the entrapment and murder of Rasputin. Finally, Rasputin had gone too far. His influence over the royal family was now not his power, but his weakness. Politicians and journalists united to force the Tsar to split the royal family, church and state. Rasputin didn't see it coming, and even had public debates with clergy and boasted about his ability to influence the Tsar and Tsarina. The elite clamored for his head. He had undermined his own position and that of the Romanovs. But this wasn't the first time somebody had wanted his head. On the 12th of July, 1914, a 33-year-old peasant woman named Chionya had attempted to assassinate Rasputin by stabbing him in the stomach outside his home. Rasputin was wounded, but after surgery and a small stay in the hospital, he recovered. Chionya had been a follower of a priest named Eliodor, who had initially supported Rasputin until he witnessed the sexual deviances and self-promotions. Eliodor had been a far-right anti-Semite and a member of an elite group working to split Rasputin away from the royal family. He was banished from St. Petersburg and defrocked. Chionya said she acted alone, but both Rasputin and the police knew she had acted upon the instructions of Eliodor. He fled the country before he could be arrested, and the woman was found to be insane. But by 1916, Rasputin knew his time was coming. He wrote the following letter to the Tsarina. I write and leave behind me this letter at St. Petersburg. I feel that I shall leave life before January 1st. I wish to make known to the Russian people, to Papa, to the Russian mother, and to the children, to the land of Russia, what they must understand. If I am killed by common assassins, and especially by my brothers, the Russian peasants, you, Tsar of Russia, have nothing to fear. Remain on your throne and govern, and you, Russian Tsar, will have nothing to fear for your children. They will reign for hundreds of years in Russia. But if I am murdered by boyars, nobles, and if they shed my blood, their hands will remain soiled with my blood. For 25 years they will not wash their hands from my blood. They will leave Russia. Brothers will kill brothers, and they will kill each other and hate each other. And for 25 years there will be no nobles in the country. Tsar of the land of Russia, if you hear the sound of the bell, which will tell you that Grigori has been killed, you must know this. If it was your relations who have wrought my death, then no one of your family, that is to say, none of your children or relations, will remain alive for more than 2 years. They will be killed by the Russian people. I shall be killed. I am no longer among the living. Pray, pray, be strong. Think of your blessed family. Having failed in every other way, a group of powerful nobles and politicians decided to take matters into their own hands and plotted to kill the mystic madman. They would lure him to the Moika Palace with a promise of bedding Yusupov's wife. On the morning of the 30th of December 1916, at the home of Felix Yusupov, Rasputin was murdered. He died from 3 gunshot wounds at close range, one through his forehead. That is almost as much as we know about his cause of death. More than this is speculation, rumor, and a lot of folklore. According to Yusupov himself, Rasputin was invited to his home after midnight with an offer to have sex with Yusupov's wife. He was sent down to the basement where he was offered tea and cakes laced with cyanide. Rasputin refused to eat them at first, but then decided to partake. Nothing happened, so the legend of Rasputin being impossible to kill emerged. He then asked for some wine and drank 3 glasses from the poisoned chalice. Again, he did not die. At around 2:30 a.m., Yusupov told Rasputin to look at the cross and say a prayer, and proceeded to shoot him once in the chest. They believed he was dead and took his coat and pretended to be Rasputin returning to his apartment. They then returned to the Moika Palace and back to the basement, whereupon Rasputin attacked Yusupov and fled upstairs. He made it to the courtyard of the palace before he was shot again. He was then wrapped in cloth and dropped into the river. News of Rasputin's murder spread quickly, even before his body was found. An investigation was begun, and then 2 workmen noted blood on the bridge and a boot on the ice below. On January 1st, his body was discovered 200 meters downstream. An autopsy revealed the body had been beaten and there were 3 gunshot wounds. He had been beaten alive and post-mortem. He was buried the following day, the funeral attended by the royal family and a few others. His wife, children, and mistress were not invited. When the Tsar abdicated, Rasputin's body was exhumed and burned to prevent it from becoming a shrine. The killers were expelled from Russia. Yusupov's account of the death of Rasputin must be taken with a pinch of salt. We cannot take it all seriously. What we do know are the simple facts from the autopsy and the photographs. He was severely beaten before he was shot through the head at close range. He was then beaten again. These were angry people. The tale of poisons not killing him could easily be fake because there were no tox screens at the autopsy. The legends of him having his penis removed were also false.
It is also rumored that even after Rasputin's death, his member has been preserved due to being a legendary gossip piece of its own.
Rasputin's penis turned up in several places, and they can't all be his, and besides, the autopsy revealed he still had it. Indeed, one of the most famous and most likely still in existence was tested by scientists and found to be that of a horse. Like much that is stated about the life of this man, it has to be seen to be believed. So let us draw our conclusions. What have we learned? Rasputin was born in a small Siberian village. He did not receive an education and was illiterate. Rasputin joined a local monastery at a very young age. He was not actually a monk, although he was known as the Mad Monk, the Black Monk, and the Holy Devil. Rasputin never took monastic vows. He accused Russian Orthodox monks of engaging in homosexual acts and said, "The monastic life is not for me. One finds violence over people there." Rasputin traveled all over Russia, Europe, and the Middle East as far as we know. The evidence for this is slim. He apparently learned many tricks. This allowed him to claim that he was a faith healer. Rasputin was a charlatan and only claimed to have special powers because, let's face it, this is the 21st century and we know such things are not scientific. Russia was full of men and women who claimed to have special powers and usually operated among the poor peasants with little knowledge other than how to raise livestock, plant seeds, and do as they're told by powerful elite, whether royal or religious. He wasn't the first mystic to have hoodwinked the royal family. He did help Alexei, especially when he banned the physicians from using aspirin because it is actually a blood thinner and made things worse. Rasputin had a way with women. He was able to seduce many noble women and society beauties, even though he had poor personal hygiene. He also had a large group of mainly female followers who gave him sexual favors. He was something of a socialist. He was against war. He advocated equal rights for Jews and the poor. He was against the death penalty, and he helped several Jews who were being persecuted by the state. However, he did actually take bribes to do this. He took bribes for a great many things. He knew the end was near, and he predicted his own death. He wasn't immortal, and he could be killed. Yes, he survived one murder attempt, but the human body is actually a very difficult thing to kill. Some believe that British intelligence actually had Rasputin murdered because they needed Russia strong in the First World War, and Rasputin was weakening their position. There is very little evidence for this and no official records in MI6, who keep copious records. His killers were all actually members of the Russian nobility. They resented the influence that he had at the court, and they believed that they were helping the Tsar by removing an evil influence from the Russian court. He was survived by his daughter, Maria Rasputin. She wrote 2 memoirs about her father, dealing with Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, the attack by Chernobyl, and the murder. A third one, The Man Behind the Myth, was published in 1977. In her 3 memoirs, the veracity of which they had been questioned, she painted an almost saintly picture of her father, insisting that most of the negative stories were based on slander and the misinterpretation of facts by his enemies. She worked as a dancer, childminder, and even a riveter. She ended her life living on Social Security in the United States. And that is the life and death of one of the most enigmatic, dark, evil, and fascinating human beings to ever have walked the planet. He was from the very beginning a narcissistic, egotistical, sexually deviant con man who used religion and mysticism to attain his objectives. He wanted to be worshipped. He wanted power. He wanted wine, wealth, and women. And he got what he wanted because of the weakness of others. Of people who lived in a world that knew little of modern science. A society engrossed in the mystical world of Orthodox Christianity. A world that all too easily accepted the fanciful answer about life and death over the stark reality. A world where priests had high-ranking official status and respect. A royal family that was out of place in their world. Their solemn duty to provide a strong male child of the divine bloodline failed. They needed desperately to find a cure, no matter the cost. God had provided that in this mystic peasant wandering holy man. After all, it was God who had given them the divine right to rule, and so it would be God who would provide them with the answer to their dilemma. When we pull back the curtain hiding this wizard of religion, we find nothing more than a serial con man, a criminal who found a clever way of hoodwinking the rich and powerful. There was nothing holy about this man, but he was very special.
We thank you for watching this video and ask you to spread the news. Put this video on your social network or link to it so that you can be part of the anonymous movement. Together we are strong. Together we are anonymous.